episode number 17 of the Who Am I podcast with the Southside Church of Christ, where we are digging into what it means to be a Christian, our identity in Jesus. I am Brian Dill, and here with me, as always, is the indelible Jackson Wells.
Indelible, I like that. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Today we're talking about bearing burdens, but I got to thinking, Jackson, do you know what you can bench press?
No.
No?
I took 2 weightlifting classes in high school.
Okay.
My sophomore year and my senior year. 2 of my favorite classes, Coach Howard, great coach, crazy, but that's just part of being a coach, I think. And I remember senior year, my last final or whatever, you have to improve on one of your weights. Now, the real goal is 225 because that's 4 plates. If you can do 4 plates, that's pretty good.
Sure.
At the NFL Combine, that's what they do, is they try to do 4 plates. But I got 205.
205.
That's the most I have ever benched in my life. In my defense, I'm 6'3", and at that time I was skinny. And it's just hard.
Were skinny.
It's hard for tall, skinny people to lift. So 205. My squats were good. I don't get it. Anyways, bench press, 205.
Okay.
What about you?
Congratulations. I have no idea. I've never worried about that, or I think I maybe have bench pressed at all, any amount, maybe 3 times.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have no idea. I don't even remember what any of that was.
After this is done, I'm going to Planet Fitness. I'm
there you
go.
go. All right. Well, anyway, let's get started with this episode. All right, so we are talking about bearing each other's burdens, which comes from Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. And if you're listening and not driving and want to open your Bible to that passage, we would encourage you to do so. But first, Jackson, do you think you have a story or anything to share about having to carry a heavy burden?
I get called upon fairly regularly, to help people move stuff.
Sure.
Because I look like I'm able to
right.
But I'm thinking, like, if we're to bear each other's burdens, the goal is to make it possible for us to lift something that's heavy. Okay. And I'm thinking, dude, what would our combined bench press max be?
Oh, me and you? Yeah. Well, you said yours was 205, so 215?
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we can work on that. No, there have been several times where I have been moving furniture with either my dad or somebody. I've moved furniture with you several times.
Yes.
But one time that sticks out in my mind is whenever me and Dad were moving this like giant piece of furniture up the stairs, and there's like
stairs are always such a pain.
It wasn't just a straight staircase. There was a landing, and it changed to directions. I'm not joking. Like, and this was while I was in high school. I believe I may have been in college.
Okay.
But me and Dad split, and Audrey might have helped, like 400 pounds easily. And it was terrifying because it's like, if something goes wrong,
right,
this is falling on one of us
down the stairs,
breaking a leg at best. Like we're looking at some catastrophic injuries. There's no way in the world I would have been able to do that by myself.
Right. Nor your dad.
Yeah.
Right.
And whenever I live in a house by myself, I move furniture by myself because I don't feel like calling anybody. But let me tell you, it is so much easier to move the couch that only weighs 100 pounds.
Sure.
With somebody else. Because, yeah, I can lift 100 pounds, but it's such an awkward thing to deal with. I don't know what I'm doing. Right. If I have somebody on the other end, it just makes it that much easier.
You're right. You're right.
And I don't get hurt. There's no risk. It's safer for everybody. Like,
yes,
you want to be able to call on people to help you. So
right, you don't end up throwing your back out, lying on the floor in pain.
Yeah,
right.
And you get to hang out with somebody. So if you ever need to move something, call me and Brian.
Yeah. Well, you can call Jackson. You're taking a big risk calling me. There's only so much help I'm going to be. So the story that I have, it goes back to when I was about 15 years old, and I decided to try this particular week at Bible camp, where if you went to this 1 week, it was half price.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to go to a lot of weeks this one particular summer, and I was willing to pay that for that half price week myself out of what I was making at my job. And so the reason it was half price was because they took out some of your free time that you normally would get, and you had to work on projects around the camp.
Okay.
Well, the year that I decided to go is the year that they decided to build steps that went up this big hill. So there was one cabin. Technically, it's two cabins, but it's one big structure with a bathhouse in the middle. It's at the top of this hill, and for years and years and years, it had just been a path through the woods to get down to the rest of the camp.
Okay.
And it was slippery. I mean, I'd fallen as a kid, slipping and sliding as if it was wet, up and down that hill.
Yeah.
I understood why it was a good idea to build steps going up to those cabins. But to build the steps themselves, they brought in railroad ties and laid those down as the step itself, and then filled in with rock.
Ooh.
And all of us campers were in like an assembly line going up and down the hill and passing those 5-gallon paint buckets
Oh, man.
full of rock.
Didn't even have wheelbarrows.
No.
Man.
You weren't getting a wheelbarrow up this hill.
Okay.
And I had blisters on my hands because we would just stand there and just pass it up, pass the next one,
brutal.
pass another one. But as miserable as that was, I didn't go back to that week of camp, by the way. As miserable as that was, I can't imagine trying to carry that bucket up the hill.
By yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have happened.
There's something about doing something like that with somebody.
Right.
I can remember growing up, we had to go get firewood, and there's nothing like getting in a rhythm with somebody.
Yes.
We would load up the Ranger with wood, we'd get back, Maria and Audrey would be at the top of the hill ready to unload it, and we'd help them unload it, and then we had this thing going, and it was just like, everybody in this house is going to be cold unless we do this. So
Right.
it's like a team effort. We're talking about burdens. We had this burden that we were all bearing, and everybody at camp knew that
Yes.
this is going to be better if we can get this staircase built.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's do it together.
And to this day, those stairs are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And when my son is having to go to that cabin because he's at the age where that's the cabins he's sleeping in, I say, "You're welcome."
I built this for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, the one other thing that whenever I think of the word burden, I think of the song by the Rolling Stones, Beasts of Burden. Beast of Burden? It's Beast of Burden. Doesn't matter. But then I ask myself, well, what is a beast of burden? Because in the song, it doesn't mean what we think it means. But a beast of burden is something that just carries something that either one, we as humans can't or don't want to.
Right.
And so whenever we kind of extrapolate that and think about what does that mean for us? Like if we're trying to bear each other's burdens, well, there's stuff in our lives, physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever, that we don't want to carry by ourselves or that we can't carry by ourselves. We try to carry by ourselves.
Okay.
But whenever we're bearing each other's burdens, we're sharing the load.
Right.
And our lives are a lot better because of it.
Well, and that's the concept here of what is said in Galatians 6. Let's get into that a little bit more with our meat of the week. We are looking at Galatians 6, verse 2, which says very simply, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Now, I think that there are a few things that we need to grasp in order to really understand what Paul is getting at here. And the first, I think, is the context of what Paul is saying. Because verse 1 says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted." So I think what that verse tells us, what verse 1 tells us about verse 2, is that bearing each other's burdens in context has a lot to do with the idea of temptation and sin and trying to help each other deal with those things.
Yeah. I think that we don't do this often enough,
Right.
and we don't do this well when we try to do it.
Okay.
I think, well, one, if we, it's kind of like it's a two-edged sword. One of the reasons we don't do this often is because we've seen how poorly it can be done.
Okay.
If we're addressing somebody because there's a sin in their life that is ruining their life, and we approach them and then they just shut us down and like they don't want to talk to us anymore, it's gonna keep us from trying to approach other people potentially.
Okay. Right.
So there's a tactful way to go about approaching somebody
Sure.
who has a burden, and you want to help them bear it because as Christians we love each other. We'll get to that later. But because we're shut down, or because we aren't able to bear somebody's burdens, it makes us not do it anymore. And so it's kind of this cycle that ends up causing us to not bear each other's burdens, which is stupid. We should break the cycle. We should help bear each other's burdens. But it's touchy, because if we're talking about the context of temptation and sin, nobody wants to share what their temptation is. Nobody wants to share what their sin is. They want to keep that to themselves because they're ashamed of it. There's no reason to be ashamed of it. Like Paul says, hey, we're all going through something. Let's get through this together.
Right. And I think that's part of the challenge, is first getting to the point where we can actually discuss what challenges we're facing, what kinds of temptations and sins we're dealing with. Because usually, like you said, when somebody is pointing out or is trying to discuss someone else's sin or temptations that they're dealing with, it's almost more like a gotcha moment.
Yeah.
Ha ha.
Yeah.
Literally just in the last couple days, there's been news article about a guy in ministry who was caught in a particular sin, and that's where our mind always goes. It's more about getting caught, and everything is just explodes, instead of let's talk about this. Let's talk about how to deal with this in a helpful way.
Yes. Well, and the more you, so like I just said, like the two-edged sword of we don't talk to people because they shut us down, because of the gotcha moments, because of the shame.
Right.
And so it's a cycle there. Well, the opposite is true. The more we approach people in a loving manner and help them bear the burden of temptation and sin, the more we do that. Because then hopefully we're able to help somebody bear their burden, and they're no longer bearing that burden, so then they can help somebody with theirs, and it's just, you create a positive cycle. It goes the complete opposite direction when you start to bear each other's burdens.
Yes, and I think also we need to be more willing to go to people with our problems.
Yeah.
Go to people with our temptations and sins, and really talk about it with them. Obviously, not total strangers.
Yeah, somebody you got a relationship with.
Somebody that you can trust to help you bear that burden. I mean, that is really what this passage is primarily about, is bearing the burdens of temptation and sin, which, if we're honest with ourselves, I think is one of the most difficult burdens that we have to bear. And it's so important that we find a way to deal with it and get help with it.
There's a sense of camaraderie whenever you are in a position to know somebody well enough to feel like you can go to them with your temptation and sin. It's like as Christians, we're on a battlefield.
Right.
And I don't want to be on a battlefield alone.
No,
I want to have brothers and sisters who are going to be willing to have my back. And so I need to be sure that I'm fostering relationships that allow me to go into battle with somebody.
Yeah.
bear my burdens.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, and as we think about it, certainly in context, like we said, this is primarily talking about temptation and sin, but the principle applies to anything that any of us are dealing with. Certainly, we want to help each other deal with the challenges of life. But the second part that I think is really important in helping us understand what Paul is getting at here is the last half of that verse in Galatians 6, verse 2, because he says that we're to bear each other's burdens, and he says, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Now that sounds very vague. What exactly is the law of Christ? Especially in the book of Galatians, because that's a letter where Paul spends a great deal of time talking about how the law itself is not what we are focused on. It's not about the law and all this, that sort of thing, talking primarily about the Old Testament law. But most any author that you look at, any commentary, they're going to say that this law of Christ is a reference to the command that Jesus gives in John 13 and verse 34, because it's there that even Jesus says, I'm giving you a new command. And the new command is to love each other as I have loved you. And so, what do you think? What do you think about how bearing each other's burdens, how that applies to this new law from Jesus?
Jesus loved us with every single thing he had.
Right.
He loved us so much that he bore our sin on the cross. That is the biggest burden that we have. And Jesus bore it. Like, he was
right.
He was the one that did it. And if he's asking us to love one another as I have loved you, you see how I bore your burdens, Jackson? That's how I want you to love other people. If there's somebody that we're supposed to love like Jesus loved, if there's somebody that I love and I see them struggling with temptation and sin, you talking about being willing to reach out to people, we need to reach out to them.
Right.
If there's somebody that I love, I think about my sisters. If they were hurting, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that they don't hurt.
Definitely.
I'm gonna go out of my way. I'm gonna have to make sacrifices so that hopefully they will come out better. Well, we're supposed to have that kind of relationship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. We're supposed to love one another. We're supposed to bear each other's burdens in that way. So, what does loving one another have to do with bearing burdens? Well, if we love one another, we bear each other's burdens. It's kind of they're kind of, I don't want to say synonymous, but they go hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree. I think that part of what we're talking about in the process of bearing each other's burdens is that sacrifice, like you talked about, that Jesus made such an incredible sacrifice for us. Again, going back to temptation and sin, that's really what it's about, is that it is going to take some sacrifice in order for us to bear each other's burdens. It's not going to be something that is just a simple, easy thing. And by the way, bearing each other's burdens is not saying, well, I'll pray for you and then leave it at that.
Yeah,
that's not bearing each other's burdens.
No.
We're talking about actual actions being taken. The time it's going to take, the effort it's going to take, the things that you're going to have to do in order to help this person bear their burden.
Whenever somebody asks me, hey, Jackson, can you help me move this couch? I don't say, I'll pray about it. I go and help them move the couch,
I'll pray you find somebody to help you bear that burden of a couch.
And this is like, it's tough kind of because, one, we haven't practiced it very much, but like, well, what is the action? And that may not be an answer we can give right now, but what is the action that we take to bear each other? There's nothing wrong with praying for somebody.
Right. I was going to say, let's not discount
keep
prayer.
Doing that. But in order to know how to help somebody, really you have to know them.
Well, and I think that means you're going to have to take the time that it takes to get to know them, to listen to them, to do what you can to try and encourage them, to support them, pray with them, not just say, I'll pray for you and see you later.
Stop right there.
Yeah, pray with them. I think, that those are the kinds of things that are really going to make a difference in a person's life. And it may be that, you contact them, you take the time to communicate with them rather than waiting for them to come to you when they're struggling. You take the time to contact them. Hey, how are you doing today? Is everything all right? Can I pray for you some more today? Do you want to get together later? Can we get some lunch together? Or, there's lots of ways that we can continue to be engaged with that person as they're struggling. And I think that's going to make a big difference in a person's life.
Yeah. Well, and don't, as with anything, we don't want to overwhelm you. You're not bearing everybody's burdens.
Right.
We sort of are in a sense, but whenever I'm not asking you to bear the burden of 225 people, because
right.
that will weigh you down quickly. But there is somebody likely in your life that that you could have a better relationship with in order to help them.
Absolutely.
Build that relationship.
Right.
You can't have a relationship with 225 people.
Not the kind of relationship where you're going to know them well enough to do that. Think of it in terms, how well do you have to know somebody before you ask them to come help you move?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
You're not asking total strangers to do that. Usually, you're not asking somebody you just met to do that. It's usually somebody that you're pretty comfortable with, and you're okay saying, "Hey, do you have the time? Is it okay if you come and help?" That level of acquaintance, that level of knowledge about each other, and friendship is going to be what it's going to take to really be able to help each other bear each other's burdens.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think the last piece of the puzzle here, in my mind, is something that we've hit on a little bit already, is that, yes, being burden bearers for other people is important, and that's definitely really what the title of this episode is about, right? But I think in our culture in America, we have shied away from the idea of asking for help so much that we just we're not willing to do it.
Yeah.
No matter how overwhelmed we might be, no matter how hard our situation may be, we don't seek out people to help us bear burdens. And that is such a mistake.
Absolutely. I am very guilty of this.
Well, right. Me too.
We want to feel like we can do anything. We want to look like we've got it all together. We're kind of creating this identity for ourselves, and we're kind of we're talking about this. The whole point of this podcast is so that we have a rooted identity in Christ. And whenever we don't count on Him and other Christians to bear our burdens, we're counting on ourselves, and we put our identity in whatever it is about us that we can quote unquote count on until it fails.
Right.
And then when that fails, we spiral, and we don't know what to do, and then we pretend like nothing's wrong, and then we just continue to get crushed by this unbearable burden.
Absolutely. And I think it's I almost want to say it's a silly thing, even though we all do it. It's such a silly thing for us to try and hide and pretend everything's okay, pretend like I don't need any help, pretend like as if that's at all, as you said, as if that's in any way what God has ever expected of us.
Can you be effective as a Christian if you're not willing to open up and share your own burdens?
I'm not sure you can, because I don't think that that's the way God has built us.
I agree.
I think that so much of what we see in Scripture about the way God has organized His people from the beginning is that we are created for community. And that's what the church is. Today the church is that community that we're supposed to be a part of, an engaged part of, an active part of. And that includes being a burden bearer and letting others help you with your burdens as well.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're going to be anywhere near as successful as Christians if we're not willing to have that kind of relationship with people.
Kind of reminds me of The Walking Dead season 1. This is years ago.
Wow.
There was a guy who, if you don't know the premise of The Walking Dead, if you get bit, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
You've got this problem, eventually you're going to turn.
You're going to become a zombie.
If we do that with our sin, if we have this burden that we're trying to keep secret and we're trying to go along with the party and try to get through this battle, but we have this burden that we're keeping secret, we don't want anybody to find out, eventually it's going to become detrimental to the group.
Right.
And it manifests itself in different ways. I'm not saying you're going to turn into a zombie and kill the rest of your group, but there's this sense of accountability and openness when everybody is willing to share their burdens.
Right.
Sounds kind of hippie. But if I can bear my burdens and not be judged by somebody, the amount of love that is in that room is something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, are you a burden bearer? I think our audience, Jackson, is going to have to answer that for themselves.
Absolutely.
You know, you're going to know whether or not that is something you're doing or not doing.
Like thinking of I'm just sitting here thinking, am I a burden bearer? Am I? I talk to people and yeah, but I know I could help others more.
Sure.
And I know for sure that I'm not telling people about what burdens I have nearly enough.
Right.
The other day, I was hanging out with a friend of mine, and I had recently, I had gotten upset about something, and I told him about it. And he was like, well, when did that happen? I was like, a week ago. And he said, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, well, what could you, I'm thinking to myself, in that moment, well, what could you have done to help me? What would have made that better? And immediately, maybe he couldn't have helped me.
Right.
But even just talking to him, a close friend of mine who knows me, who has similar struggles,
absolutely,
it makes a difference.
It does.
Be a burden bearer and be willing to share your own.
Absolutely. And even just saying it out loud sometimes is just part of that process of being able to see what challenges you're up against, and you may not even need a lot of advice from somebody. You may just need to just get it out there.
Yeah.
And
sometimes that's all it is. Sometimes our burden is simply a thought.
Yes.
And whenever we release it, it can be gone.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think that this is an episode that a lot of us, ourselves included, need to hear.
Absolutely.
Need to take to heart, and so we're excited. We hope that this has been an episode that is helpful for you, and we want to thank you for listening. And we hope that it's going to help you grow in your faith, and especially be a blessing as you grow in your identity as a follower of Jesus. Jackson, any last words?
I don't have anything else. Just call us at 1-800-MOVING-COMPANY if you need me and Brian.
And ask for Jackson. All right. Well, have a blessed week.